The first several chapters of Revelation introduce people to the book by first of all asking people to take a look at who was the book written for. And we found that it was written for Christians living in different kinds of situations. Some were persecuted, some were complacent, some were just trying to get along without letting their faith interfere with the rest of life. In those first few chapters, after John has taken us on a tour through these 7 churches and the various challenges facing them, John introduced us to God seated on the throne and invited readers to join in that heavenly chorus singing praises to the one true God. In Revelation chapter 5, John has somebody else that he wants his readers to meet. It's not the dragon or the beast, but rather John wants his readers to meet Christ. And before John will let readers get any further along, he wants to introduce them to who Christ is. Now, when we read along in chapter 5 of Revelation, and we find that God is seated on the throne holding a scroll in his hand. John sees the scroll and assumes that that is God's will for the world that is inscribed on the scroll. The problem is that no one can open the scroll. No one has been found worthy to do so. There's a search made. No one can be located until someone tells John, look, that the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Now, when John hears this, he is hearing about a lion of the tribe of Judah. Revelation is using picture language. This is a great opportunity for us to think a bit about how Revelation communicates using these word pictures. When John is introduced to the Lion of the tribe of Judah, when he hears one of the elders in heaven speak about the lion, this brings images to mind. You don't have to be a specialist in biblical studies to know that a lion connotes things like strength or majesty. A lion is the king of the beasts. It's one of the strongest animals. It's the image that was often associated with kingship, both in Israel and in other countries. When John hears about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, then, having conquered, he has visions of strength and majesty going through his mind. Now the question is, what will John see when he turns around to get a good look at this lion? Here's where Revelation makes a surprising move. In Revelation chapter 5, verse 5, John hears the promise that God is sending a lion to conquer, the Root of David, and David, of course, was one of the great kings, one of the great lion-like kings in Israel's history. But when John turns around to see the lion, in chapter 5, verse 6, what he sees is not a lion, but a lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered. Now this creates a different set of word images, word pictures. If the lion connotes strength, the lamb usually connotes weakness. If the lion is the king of the animals, the lamb is one of its meekest members. If the lion preys on other animals for its food, the lamb who was slaughtered is a victim of sacrifice. John hears about the lion, but what he sees is the lamb. And in juxtaposing those two images, in using those two word pictures to introduce us to Christ, John conveys something about who Christ is. He is the one in whom God's promise concerning strength and leadership is fulfilled, but the way in which the promise is fulfilled is by sending the Lamb, by sending Christ crucified. God keeps the promise of the lion by sending the Lamb. God keeps the promise of someone to build the kingdom by sending his Son to be crucified. This gives us a glimpse into the way in which Revelation communicates through its word pictures. When we turn to chapter 6, we find John hearing about the 4 horsemen. John will hear about the Lamb opening each of the 7 seals on the scroll that he received from God. And when he does so, opening each one of the seals in turn, a horseman appears. The first horseman is a rider on a white horse who comes out conquering and to conquer. Now, one of the most famous illustrations of all of this was done by Albrecht Dürer, who created a vivid woodcut showing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Dürer helpful aid, I think, in biblical interpretation. You'll notice when you see Durer's woodcut that the first horseman, the one who's riding on the white horse and holding a bow, is at the far end of the picture, the one farthest away from you as a viewer. That's because conquest is what this horseman represents, and conquest has to do with a threat around one's borders, the threat of having one's borders overrun by a foreign power. You'll note that Durer, when he moves to the second horseman, comes a step closer to you as a viewer. You'll find that the second horseman represents violence. This horseman holds a great sword above his head. The horseman represents the kind of violence that people do to one another. That's clear in the description. He was given a great sword that people might slaughter one another. This is no longer simply talking about the conquest of one nation over another, of having one's borders overrun by a foreign power. Here we find the violence that occurs even in our own communities, the violence that people do to each other. When you come to the next horseman, this one represents economic insecurity. You'll find that this horseman holds a pair of scales or balances in his hand. We often think of them, as Durer portrays them, associated with the justice system. But for Durer, he was portraying the economic system. People had to use balances or scales when they did commerce. You would weigh out a certain amount of goods for a certain amount of money. This horseman talks about the economic ups and downs in people's lives and the threat of economic hardship. A voice comes along with this horseman declaring that it would take a whole day's pay of a denarius in order to buy a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. Well, a quart of wheat would be about what it would take to feed one person for a day. 3 quarts of barley, you might be able to feed a small family, although it wouldn't be much. What that means is that you're spending your entire day's paycheck simply to put a little bread on the table. You're not starving, but you're living on the edge. Economic insecurity. The last horseman represents death. It's the one that Durer puts at the front of his picture. It's the one that you might not see right away when you look at it, but it's there in the front, and it brings the threat up into your lap. The fourth horseman is finally one that nobody escapes. Death finally comes to all. Now, what's interesting about the 4 horsemen is that even the most futuristic interpreters assume that the 4 horsemen represent threats. Everybody agrees that we're not supposed to look for CNN to capture a rider on a white horse with a bow charging down Pennsylvania Avenue in order to signal that the end of the world is at hand. Everybody agrees that these horsemen represent threats. The question is what kind of threats they represent. I think that the threats that we see in the 4 horsemen were threats that John's first readers would have said are real. Conquest, violence, economic insecurity, death. For the people in the 7 churches, those threats were real. We can ask ourselves, do those threats remain real for us? I think the answer would be yes. For the generations in between, John's time and our time, the same answer would be true. They've been threatened by conquest, violence, economic insecurity, and death as well. John's imagery works by pointing to things that are real, but are difficult to put on a timeline. They convey things that unsettle us, disturb us, in order to awaken us to just how tenuous life in the world can be. As you make your way through Revelation chapter 6, you'll find the threats simply increasing in intensity as you move from one seal to the next and the next. By the time you've moved through seal number 5 with its vision of the martyrs and to seal number 6, where you find the earth quaking and you find the mountains falling and you find the sky becoming dark and the stars falling from the heavens, people finally begin crying out with a question: who can stand? And that's a great question. That's exactly the kind of question Revelation wants you to ask. Who can stand in the face of these kinds of insecurities? Rather than opening up the 7th seal, Revelation has an intermission in which, now that a good question has been asked, who can stand, An answer is given. There are angels that hold back the forces of destruction until the servants of God can be sealed on their foreheads. And now John hears about the number of the sealed, 144,000. Here John is again using some of his picture language. The 144,000, they come from every tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel. 12,000 from each tribe. Now the question is, John has only heard about these people. He has not yet seen them. He's heard about God preserving, sealing a group out of the 12 tribes. But when John turns to get a good look at them, down in verse 9, what he sees is not 144,000. What he sees is a countless multitude from every tribe and tongue and folk and nation. The promise of the 144,000 is a promise about God preserving a remnant out of the people of Israel. What he sees in the countless multitude is the way in which God keeps that promise by calling people from the 12 tribes, but not stopping there. Calling people from every tribe. Saving 144,000, yes, but not stopping with 144,000, saving a countless multitude. Just as God promised the lion and fulfilled the promise by sending the lamb, God promised to keep to a remnant of the people of Israel, but kept the promise in a way that exceeds anything that people could have imagined. What you find in Revelation chapter 7 is that again is an occasion for praise. You find the people around the throne singing salvation to God who sits on the throne, let all cry aloud and honor the Son. Words again that have been set to music. The verses of the hymn, You Servants of God, Your Master Proclaim, is a familiar way in which these words have inspired Christians in many generations to continue worshiping. If the vision of the four horsemen unsettles people, the vision of the great multitude encourages us to focus our worship on God, who truly has the power to save. When we lift up our voices with those in the vision, Revelation is having the effect that it was designed to have, drawing us into that same group of worshipers that we find in the text. Some things that I'd like you to think about, questions to ask. Think about the four horsemen and put yourself in the position of those first readers of the book of Revelation. How would they have been threatened by economic insecurity or death, conquest or violence? Ask yourself how your parents or grandparents faced those same threats. Then ask yourself, where do you see those threats today? After you've done that, then ask yourself, how does being claimed by God give you a way to stand, even though those threats are real? How does being claimed by God give you a way to stand in the face of them and to find joy in knowing the God who has claimed you and redeemed you?